In this episode of Ringside Historians, we are going to cover Frank the Animal Fletcher. Fletcher, from out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, campaigned in the middleweight division. Fletcher turned pro in 1976 and would fight until 1985. He never won a world championship, but had a solid USBA run. Fletcher fought from out of the southpaw stance and had a crowd-pleasing, relentless style. He provided fight fans with entertainment and was promoted in the Ring magazine as one of the most entertaining fighters of that time period. Coming from the hard streets of Philly, Fletcher knew how to take care of himself at a young age. He was a tough kid that started catching charges at a very young age. Fletcher also had siblings that were fighters. He was raised by a very supportive mother named Lucille that taught him and the majority of her family how to fight. She would later be seen at his fights, and the fight fans took notice of the important role she played in Fletcher's life. She was also a very noisy supporter at Fletcher's fights. Lucille's presence was definitely felt. Lucille also taught her brother Dick Turner how to fight. Fletcher's uncle Dick Turner was a welterweight contender in the 1960s. In fact, Lucille taught all 7 of her brothers how to fight. Her nickname in her hood was Little Joe Louis, okay? Fletcher definitely took after his mother. Fletcher was 8 when he picked up his first charge, though. He had a lot of stuff going on outside of boxing. According to Fletcher, jail was his second home. He would spend the next years of his life in and out of incarceration, including a 1975 stabbing in which he stabbed a man in the upper back with a butcher knife, okay? In 1978, Fletcher had approached the woman on several occasions in an attempt to prevent her from testifying against him for a previous shooting incident in which he shot at her while she was standing on her porch. He also punched this woman in the face and threw her against the wall. Then he shot her in both legs, allegedly, okay? When asked in a 1983 interview where his father was, Fletcher responded by saying his father was a fighter too and lost his first fight against his mother. Frank had the battle scars of a fighter. Many of these scars was not caused in the ring, including his missing front teeth, which occurred in a jailhouse fight with another incarcerated fighter. The scar that ran across his nose happened in a street fight. Even at the height of his popularity, the incidents outside the ring continued, including arrests for disorderly conduct. Fletcher turned pro in 1976 and his career moved slowly. He was not taking boxing seriously, sometimes only fighting once or twice a year. Fletcher's break came at the beginning of 1980 as he would get a chance to participate in a tournament featured by ESPN. In one of these fights, he KO'd Jerome Jackson. Jackson would be carried out on a stretcher, and Fletcher had earned a new nickname. He would be branded the Animal. The victories would continue, and Fletcher's popularity would grow. There was a string of fights that was being featured on the all-new ESPN channel. There was victories over Caveman Lee, a young man that had predicted a third-round knockout. In fact, Fletcher was the underdog going into this fight. This fight was part of the ESPN middleweight tournament. Being featured on ESPN helped Fletcher grow. Fletcher would stop Caveman Lee. Lee was a young fighter in his 20s and would go on an impressive winning streak after the loss and would enter the ring in less than 2 years facing middleweight king Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Fletcher defeated Randy McGrady and others. The winning continued and landed him a shot at the USBA crown. The fight would happen on NBC Sports. He would be fighting young fighter Norberto Sabater. Sabater was an undefeated fighter. He was 19-0. He came to fight also, but Fletcher wanted it more. It was obvious. He got the better of the inside exchanges in there against Sabater, but once again it was a crowd-pleasing fight. Fletcher will win the USBA crown and begin his USBA run. He also wanted a shot at middleweight king Marvin Hagler.
Shadow battle. led by Frank Fletcher. Has been a slugfest right from the start. Sabatier able to hang in despite the assault by Fletcher from the opening bell. Roberto Sabatier, 3 rounds. The winner by a unanimous decision and a new United States Boxing Association middleweight champion, Clint the Animal Fletcher.
Were you surprised the man came to you?
Yes, I was.
Did he hurt you any time?
No, just when he kept butting me.
He kept butting you. Your eyes closed. Did it bother you?
No, it didn't bother me.
Are you ready to fight Braxton, the only man to beat you decisively?
Yes, I am.
You're ready to go anywhere in the middleweights, huh?
Yes, sir.
Good luck. You are an animal, as they said. You have strength and you have courage.
Thank you.
Fletcher's first defense was against Ernie Singletary, who was also from out of Philadelphia. Singletary was coming off a points loss to Alan Minter in England a few months earlier.
This is a great fight. Out of shape coming into a fight. Big left hook by Frank Fletcher.
That was that wide-angle left hand that is Fletcher's best shot.
Singletary's still there, though. It's the right eye.
Oh, you're right. Right eye.
It's the same one that's closing. Now he's got a cut over it, it looks like.
And that's going to bring out the fury in Frank Fletcher. You can believe this. The choppy right slows up Singletary. His left eye is in real bad shape.
Fletcher's beginning to assert now.
Paul Vecchi attending to that left eye. It is quite swollen. And they're not going to let it go.
That's it. It was a heck of a fight, Jim. Look at Singletary's face.
Fletcher would defend successfully in yet another war. Even though the fight was stopped due to Singletary's eye, Fletcher would be recognized as the only fighter to ever stop Singletary. Fletcher would then have his third fight with Tony Braxton from out of New Jersey. That's right, 3 fights. Their first fight had ended up as a draw, and Braxton would win a unanimous decision in their second fight. The first 2 fights happened at a state prison, but this time things would be much better for both fighters as they would be fighting on NBC. Braxton was the older brother of Dwight Braxton, and according to an article in the New York Times, Tony would ask his younger brother Dwight for money often to support his heroin addiction. Like Fletcher, Tony Braxton came from the streets and had spent a lot of his young life incarcerated. Tony had problems with drugs and alcohol and was now residing in a residential program to assist him with his drug and alcohol problems. Some of his fellow residents came out to support him, along with his younger brother, who was now the WBC light heavyweight champion of the world. The life of the Braxton brothers is very interesting in itself and will be discussed on a future episode of Ringside Historians. Braxton's manager and trainer Lou Dover was telling Braxton in between rounds that he needs to throw more punches. Though Braxton had his moments, it appeared Fletcher wanted the victory more. The fight took place in Jersey and was a pro-Braxton crowd, but Fletcher was very determined. Lucille Fletcher was also in the house and could be heard over the screaming crowd. Fletcher had also been cut in this fight, which cuts and swelling was a regular thing in Fletcher fights, okay? Braxton was very tricky on the inside and had excellent footwork. Fletcher would defend his USBA crown successfully, but it wasn't easy.
Tony Braxton has nothing to do.
Now, he seemed to get you in trouble in one round when you looked like you were getting tired. Were you ever in trouble with Tony Braxton?
No, that's a little. 1 round. Yeah, that's 1 round.
Did you feel like you had him on the verge of a knockout any time?
Yes, several rounds.
Let me ask you, what do you eat to keep going 12 rounds like that?
Nothing but diet food. Low fat milk. Low fat everything. Everything low fat.
Here's former champ. Here's the great Jersey Joe Walcott, who's going to present the belt. A man who knows about belts in his day.
A few months later, Fletcher was back on NBC to defend his USBA belt. He would fight Clint Jackson, who was fighting from out of Nashville, Tennessee. Clint Jackson was on the 1976 Olympic team, but did not medal that year. Jackson had only lost one fight coming into this fight here. His only loss was to Tony Braxton, which occurred in May of 1981. Since that loss, Jackson had piled up 8 victories. And on top of that, he did this in a year. He was a very busy fighter to have an 8-fight winning streak in only 1 year since his first loss. I do believe that there was some careful matchmaking taking place due to them not wanting to blow that damn near guaranteed title shot against Marvin Hagler. Jackson was picked based on the fact that he had just been stopped by Tony Braxton, who Fletcher had just defeated. But maybe they wasn't considering the fact that Jackson was just coming off stopping 6 opponents in a row. This fight was a war. Fletcher was taking a lot of punches in these fights. His relentless style was very reckless. Fletcher at times seemed to want to utilize the jab. He appeared to have a solid jab and excellent instincts in the ring. But as soon as he began fighting off the jab, he would go back to what he knew best, which was an aggressive, reckless style. You could hear his mother in the crowd screaming and instructing Fletcher to use his jab and to go to the body. Fletcher took some time in this fight to work the jab and look for counters.
He's very little urging, continuing to land on Clint Jackson.
The year coming up. Since Joe Frazier just pushed him back, and here comes Clint Jackson.
Clint Jackson with a combination landing on Fletcher. To the left, the right, then to the body. Uppercut, left hook. Right uppercut did not connect. We're coming to the conclusion of round 3. Fletcher took a pounding from Jackson, and the animal is right back. And here's Jackson, final second, 3rd round.
But at the end of round 4, Jackson rocked Fletcher, and Fletcher went back to what he knows best.
To get here, and that's an awful lot of experience.
Oh! Jackson landing on Fletcher, and Fletcher in big trouble. Jackson looking to conclude it. Fletcher looking to last about 40 seconds left, round 4.
Fletcher in big trouble, but working his way out. If ever there was a chance for Clint Jackson to get away and win this fight, it's now.
And check out the look of Lucille Fletcher, not pleased.
Turn this fight.
Fletcher started to apply some pressure on the inside. He was trying to get onto the inside. At times he would work off the jab again. He even was on his toes during some of this fight. He needed that kind of experience for an upcoming Hagler fight. He was going to need a few different game plans to be the prime Marvin Hagler. The question was, how much would Fletcher have left going into a Hagler fight when he's getting involved in all of these wars during his USBA run and his TV run? He was also cutting very easy as well as swelling up in these bouts. Reading the 1983 issue of the Ring magazine, it appears that some thought Fletcher was taking a risk by continuing to defend his USBA title rather than go after the world belt, which was held by Marvin Hagler. Fletcher was popular on TV, and there was an interest in Hagler versus Fletcher. This interest was, of course, coming from fight fans. The fans knew that every time Fletcher put it on the line, he gave it his all. He was leaving a piece of himself in that ring after every one of these wars. Then there was others who felt Fletcher was not ready for a fighter like Hagler, who was also a banger in there, but had a much more calculated, skilled attack rather than a reckless attack. Hagler was a banger, but was also a ring technician that could do some of everything in the ring. Hagler knew how to make adjustments and set traps and was also gifted with unique attributes. Fletcher would win another hard-fought fight against Jackson.
His punches have been answered by Clint Jackson. That time, not answered. Fletcher. Clint Jackson with the hook. And Fletcher coming alive.
Jackson in big trouble.
For 12, this is for the USBA, United States Boxing Association middleweight title, but on the line for Frank Fletcher, our shot at the middleweight champion, Marvin Hagler.
Unfortunately for Jackson, he is still alive, serving a life sentence in an Alabama prison. I will see if I can find out more about that and follow up with a later video. Fletcher and his fans continued to push for a Marvin Hagler fight. According to NBC, he was supposed to be getting a shot against Hagler after the Clint Jackson victory. That didn't happen, but Fletcher stayed active with another defense, fighting a young fighter, James Hardrock Green, who was a fighter from out of New Jersey. Hardrock had only ever lost one fight off the distance, plus Hardrock had piled up over 10 victories since losing that decision. Once again, Fletcher was facing a young, strong fighter that was gaining some momentum. Both fighters had been fighting on NBC. Fight commentary over at NBC was provided by Marv Albert and Dr. Pacheco. What I found interesting about NBC's coverage was a discussion that involved Dr. Pacheco. It appears as though they was presenting the addition of a strength and conditioning coach here. They addressed criticisms that old school trainers had with adding a strength and conditioning coach to the team. Doing some mild research online, it appears as though NBC was extremely late when it comes to the subject, but that's how they outlined it, man, and presented it to the world.
Practice something, you can improve on anything. Sight stimulus or sound stimulus. Hopefully, when he gets in the ring.
Well, I certainly hope so. I think boxing has been in the dark ages to a certain degree, and every other professional sport has an athletic trainer but boxing, and I think it's time that we moved and progressed in a professional manner.
All right, along with the USBA middleweight title that is on the line, the training methods in terms of conditioning also on the line here today.
Another thing I find interesting is how often Fletcher is fighting in New Jersey. He's defeating a lot of fighters that come from out of New Jersey. I see his mother in the crowd, and it does appear that Fletcher has supporters over there. His supporters was able to come out because where Fletcher was from, it wasn't too far from New Jersey, so his supporters was able to come, and I think he has some supporters right there in New Jersey too. His fights was entertaining, people liked him. New Jersey seemed like a second home to Fletcher. Maybe a third home, since Fletcher says that his second home was incarceration. Again, man, the fight was a war.
Big rally by Green. A terrible moment for that warning. When he hit the line. Green looking to cover up. And Green is taking a beating now. Fletcher is landed. Stop the fight. Green's mother is screaming behind her. She wants to fight up. Green has got to do some punching, and they're going to stop it. Yes, they are. They're going to stop it, and well done.
Fletcher was also very good at catching a lot of the body shots with his elbows. He was an excellent infighter. I think that Fletcher was more intelligent in the ring than many people thought. Fletcher kept the pressure on Hardrock Green and stopped him in the 6th round. Fletcher was still moving towards that shot against Hagler that he had been promised before defeating Green. His team decided that it would be best for Fletcher to defend his title one more time before facing Hagler. He was set to fight Wilford Scipio in early 1983. Scipio had lost the fight earlier in 1982 to Fletcher's most recent victim, James Hardrock Green. I believe this was the reason Scipio would be chosen as an opponent. Once again, his team was picking an opponent that had a loss to one of the fighters Fletcher had previously defeated. Fletcher was now also earning big paydays for that time period. By the year of 1983, Fletcher was doing well and was driving a $21,000 Lincoln Town Car. He was getting set to get his shot against Marvin Hagler, which at this point was guaranteed. A loss would be a major setback at this point. Scipio was a talented fighter from out of Texas. According to the announcers at NBC, Scipio was somewhat of an underachiever, but was a very dangerous fighter that had taken the life of another fighter from damage he inflicted upon his opponent. And of course, he had recently lost the decision facing Hardrock Green. Since that loss, Scipio was on a 4-fight winning streak. Scipio was described by NBC to be a more talented fighter than Fletcher. According to the guys at NBC, Fletcher had already beaten several fighters that were more talented, but Fletcher had other ingredients. Scipio was a big middleweight and seemed to be able to handle Fletcher's relentless pressure. He was able to back Fletcher up. He smothered Fletcher's punches and would launch his own attack. The spin move that Fletcher had the tendency to utilize while on the ropes was not as successful against Scipio. He was also a better outboxer than Fletcher and used his height advantage when necessary. He was also leaning all over Fletcher, even utilizing a headlock, sapping the energy from Fletcher's legs. Scipio's bullying tactics and muscling Fletcher around the ring was also being mentioned by the NBC commentators. The crowd was even booing Scipio at times for the dirty tactics, but Scipio did what he had to do in order to win. The victory would help Scipio get a fight against Marvin Hagler. Scipio was a talented fighter, but Hagler was on a whole different level.
In January of 1983, a fight agreement was signed between Frank Fletcher and Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
And there he took a right hand. That buckled his knees. Scipio back in his own corner. Takes a combination, goes down. And may not make it up.
Fletcher would have to wait on another opportunity to get that title shot. Hagler was now tied up with an upcoming fight against legendary Roberto Duran. Fletcher would have to get back on track. Curtis Ramsey was an experienced fighter, and a big win would perhaps help Fletcher get back on track. Fletcher was no longer the USBA champion, but there was still an interest in Fletcher from fight fans, and Fletcher would also remain on TV and yet again fight in New Jersey. Fletcher was still considered by many to be a top 3 to 5 middleweight. At this time, he was rated at number 2 by the Ring magazine. The only problem is that Fletcher was still in his 20s, but was already banged up. He was now getting cut in every fight, and of course, he would suffer a cut against Ramsey as well. Fletcher kept the pressure on the whole fight and eventually was able to break Ramsey down. Fletcher still had a chance to get that Hagler fight. He would have to get through the extremely tough Juan Roldan from out of Argentina. Roldan also had some of the legendary Carlos Monzon's team in his corner, okay? The winner of this fight would face Marvin Hagler next. Roldan was a top-rated fighter. Not only that, but Roldan had already had over 50 fights. He was also a big middleweight, and when him and Fletcher was in the ring, one could see who the bigger man was. Fletcher's aggressive, reckless style had also aged him in the ring, okay? The word was out that Fletcher wasn't very focused outside of the ring either.
Well, if he keeps that up. Oh, and he caught him with the right hand. Roldan with the right hand. Oh, Fletcher is off handful here with Juan Roldan in the opening round.
It's sad when a fighter washes out before the age of 30. Now Roldan, with over 50 fights, he had only lost twice. He had been disqualified in one of those losses, and the other fight he suffered very early in his career. Roldan wanted to prove that he was the fighter that should be facing Hagler. Another thing that was different was seeing Fletcher fighting in Vegas, okay? The majority of Fletcher's fights was taking place in New Jersey. I also noticed that his mother was not getting the camera time for these next few fights, okay? You know, when you see Fletcher, you expect to see Lucille somewhere around, but you didn't see her as much when it wasn't on NBC. You didn't see Lucille around as much if the fight wasn't covered by NBC, okay? So now you have Fletcher fighting in unfamiliar territory. He's used to fighting in Jersey and Philly. He's having problems outside of the ring. He's just recently lost his big title shot at Marvin Hagler by taking a chance. Was this the beginning to the end of Frank the Animal Fletcher? Unfortunately, Fletcher would be stopped by Roldan, and Roldan would get the Hagler fight.
And we're under a minute remaining. Well, I think what you said was very accurate. This is not the same guy. Maybe Animal is approaching the end of his road. Maybe those succession of beatings have been too much for Animal Fletcher. Comes a night when you ain't got it anymore, and it looks like it's tonight for Animal because he's getting bouted. To the body. And now here's Roldan with the right, and Fletcher is down again. Right on his face, and when they get down on their face, they don't get up.
Roldan was able to beat Fletcher at his own game. Would he be able to carry that over to Marvin Hagler?
This is for you, Juan Roldan. You're not fighting the Animal Frank Fletcher. You're fighting the monster, the marvelous one.
Kept in the condition of Roldan. There was a right hand, and Juan Domingo Roldan goes down. And let's see if he wants to get up. He was hit on the eye also. And I think he's saying no more. That's it.
Fletcher continued to have his problems outside the ring. Somehow, Fletcher was still able to squeeze in a few more fights, including a third chance to perhaps secure a title shot. Fletcher would be matched up against undefeated young power puncher John the Beast Mugabe. The fight would be held in Tampa. Fletcher did not appear to be at home fighting away from New Jersey or Philadelphia. I'm not sure if a more familiar crowd could have saved him from the Beast, though. Mugabe was 22-0 with 22 knockouts and had a TV run going. He was making a big statement in each fight and was a huge risk to Marvin Hagler. He was also younger than these heavyweights like Fletcher and Hagler, who were born in the 1950s. Fletcher was no longer the fighter he was back in the days of the ESPN tournament. The middleweights were getting bigger too, now that fighters were no longer having to meet the requirements of a same-day weigh-in. If Fletcher was more dedicated to his career, he should have moved down and trained to make weight at junior middle. Mugabe and Roldan appeared to look bigger than Fletcher when they got in the ring on fight night, okay? So did Scipio. Mugabe would stop Fletcher.
The trouble with the combination. Fletcher. Let's see the Fletcher. He's trying to hook Fletcher free.
Mugabe would continue his reign of terror and eventually would get a title shot facing Marvin Hagler. Fletcher had one more fight in early 1985, but would be stopped in that fight. Fletcher would then go to prison, and while in prison, he continued to find trouble, especially with correctional officers, and was violent towards them, earning him extra time. He also had incidents with other inmates too, problems with other inmates. He was released, and he had to go back to prison. Now I have other newspaper articles here that I could show you regarding Fletcher's life outside of the ring, okay? Apparently on Valentine's Day 1996, Fletcher was sentenced to 22 years for carrying a firearm as a convicted felon. Fletcher had threatened a video store owner with a gun in 1993, but was not sentenced until 1996. After Fletcher threatened the video store owner, he informed the victim that he was on his way to see his parole officer. The video store owner called Fletcher's parole officer, and Fletcher was handcuffed. The weapon was found in the trunk of the vehicle of the person who transported him to see the parole officer. The weapon was loaded with one magazine containing 11 live rounds. Before that charge, Fletcher already had recent weapon charges and charges for aggravated assault. Okay, here we have an article from July 29th, 1986, the Philadelphia Daily News. Fletcher's having some problems outside of the ring. He's picked up a number of new charges. Let's pick up on some of this article. It says here that Fletcher made terroristic threats while being transported from prison to a city hall courtroom. And Fletcher was charged with simple assault after a prison guard said Fletcher hit him during an altercation the guard was breaking up. Everybody in here seems to want to try me, Fletcher said on the phone one day. If I don't get out of here soon, I ain't never gonna get out. So he's having some issues outside of the ring, and he had been having continuous issues for quite some time anyways, throughout the majority of his life. He first started catching charges when he was less than 10 years old, okay? Now we have another article here from January 28th, 1987. As you can see, Fletcher is incarcerated at this point. He makes the newspaper as he has just been stabbed in prison. He was stabbed by another inmate, but according to Fletcher, some of the correctional officers helped set that whole thing up so he could get stabbed. So he's not trusting anybody. He's saying he needs to get out of there. If he doesn't get out of there, he's going to kill somebody or somebody's going to kill him. Fletcher, they said, had a real problem with any kind of authority. If he has a problem with any kind of authority, prison is not the place where he wants to be. That's where Fletcher is ending up here. It's really unfortunate, man. Around this same time here, his younger brother gets in trouble, Anthony Fletcher. He had already had some problems with the law throughout his life too, but now he's getting into some serious trouble. So you have both of these two brothers getting into lots of trouble. I'm pretty sure Miss Lucille was going through quite a bit during this time period, okay? Okay, now we see another article from 1989, okay? Fletcher is talking about how his life has changed around, how he's found religion behind bars. He was transferred from the place where he was stabbed, but he still was having problems with correctional officers and any kind of authority. He's saying in this article, though, that he plans not to go back to Philadelphia when he gets out. He's talking about suing people, but he is talking about staying out of the streets, focusing on his family. As you can see, another article here in 1995, Fletcher was shot. Somebody did attempt to take his life. He ended up going back to prison. I think it was for some kind of assault charges. He goes back to prison. He remained there for several years. Now, I found an article from 2019, and apparently Miss Lucille Fletcher is still alive and still a big voice in the community. Where she resides, she's like the mother of the whole block, okay, of the whole neighborhood. She's in her 80s now. I would like to give a shout out to Miss Lucille Fletcher and wish her the best. Frank Fletcher is still alive too. I want to send him my best, man. I heard too that the younger brother did receive a raw deal in court. Hopefully they could revisit this case, man. A lot of things has changed. Technology has changed. We're finding out a lot of people was locked up for stuff that they shouldn't have been locked up for. We're finding out all kinds of stuff, so they should at least revisit the case, man. I would like to see Miss Lucille happy too. I'd like to see her son come out of incarceration while she's still around. All right. She's doing well, man. Apparently, the Fletcher brothers was inducted into some kind of Hall of Fame. I think it was maybe for Philly, and she went and she picked up the awards in 2019 because Frank couldn't be there. He was sick, and the younger brother, Anthony, is incarcerated, okay? Now, I do want to say that I get my information from newspaper articles and from magazines, okay? So I'm only reporting what was reported back then. I don't know if Frank Fletcher did any of this stuff that they're saying he did that I'm reading here. There's a little bit of a timeline right here of some of the things that he did, just some of the things here. It says on May 17th, 1975, the 21-year-old Fletcher stabbed the man. They named the man, and they say he stabbed him with a butcher knife, okay? In 1978, they're saying here, Fletcher approached the woman. They give her name. He's making an attempt for her not to testify against him in court. He eventually does go and he beats her up, and then he shoots her, okay? Now, I don't know if this is true or not. I mean, he did continue fighting after 1978, all right? He did not have very many fights in the 70s because he was always in and out incarceration. Because really, Fletcher should have started much earlier than he actually started. He should have started getting into the swing of things, you know, a little bit earlier in the 70s. He did get the break on ESPN. They're talking about another incident he had with a correctional officer in 1986. This article also covers that he was arrested 17 times beginning at age 8. And then it says here, the animal has also been at the receiving end of a gun. In February 1995, he was shot in the stomach and buttocks during an incident in West Philadelphia. So that article in 1989 where he was saying that he's not going to return to Philadelphia, apparently he did return to Philadelphia. That's pretty much it with Frank the Animal Fletcher. He never did get a shot at Marvin Hagler. That's the fight that he wanted. Looking at his fights, do I think he had much of a chance against Hagler? To be honest with you, I think Hagler would have won that fight. I would say Hagler to stop Fletcher in 6 or 7 rounds. Fletcher was a very tough guy though, and maybe at one time he could have provided Hagler with a very tough fight, especially if they would have caught him around the time when that ESPN tournament was going. He seemed to be in his prime, and he seemed to peak around 80, 81. Okay. Maybe the fight with Hagler would have been a little bit more competitive if it happened around 1980. By the time 1985 and 86 and all of that came around, Fletcher was way too far past it. Hagler was getting pretty old his damn self. They were around the same age. Hagler, however, was one of the most talented middleweights of all time. So some of the guys that Fletcher fought ended up fighting Hagler too. It was a different result when these guys fought Hagler, okay? I'd like to thank everybody again for the viewership. I'd like to thank everyone again for viewing my video. Please rate my videos because this will really help my channel grow. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon.